Hey everybody, welcome into the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy. We have Deja Foxx, congressional candidate, with us today. We'll chat with her in just a moment, but first, thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you listening, and we'd love to hear your comments. So email us at backroomandy@gmail.com and or post on our social media, and we'll read some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please rate and review and follow or subscribe, and you'll be notified every time we post a new episode. So I want to spend a couple of minutes here just telling you about Deja, because she really does have quite a storied life. She was raised by a single mom in Tucson, Arizona. As a free lunch kid in public schools, her family relied on SNAP benefits, Section 8 housing, and Medicaid to make ends meet. Having experienced homelessness because of her mother's struggles with substance abuse, she balanced high school classes with long nights working at a gas station. Deja found her first fight advocating for better sex education in Tucson schools, where she organized a campaign of student storytellers, delivering a win for tens of thousands of students who until then had been learning a curriculum last updated in the 1980s. She later went viral for confronting then-Senator Jeff Flake after he voted to strip her and millions of other women of their access to essential birth control funding. Teen Vogue selected her as a member of their 21 under 21 class of 2018, and Forbes named her to the 30 under 30 list in 2024. She also received Planned Parenthood's Catalyst for Change Award, a United Nations Global Impact Award, the Muhammad Ali Humanitarian Award, Gloria Steinem's Woman of Vision Award, and a Global Citizen Prize, all before turning 25. After graduating from Columbia University as the first in her family to receive a college degree, Deja moved back to Tucson to continue the fight for women, youth, and underserved communities in the heart of southern Arizona. Back on April 2nd, she announced her candidacy to become the first Gen Z woman elected to Congress, running in the open seat in Arizona's 7th Congressional District. Deja, welcome back into the back room.
Thanks for having me.
So really exciting news. You are running for Congress. I want to talk with you about that in a moment. As I said to you before we got on the air, I'm not surprised. The minute we met and I spoke with you, I thought this is what's going to be in your future. Your life story is really full of personal hardship as well as incredible achievement. It's an inspiring journey, which has taken you from homelessness to national prominence for your activism, to the DNC convention last summer, and now at 25, running for Congress. Tell us a little bit about what it's been like to be on that journey.
Yeah, I mean, it is the way that I grew up that brought me where I am today. I am running for Congress here in Congressional District 7, which includes my hometown of Tucson, Arizona. And I'm doing so not because I want to be something, but because I feel a deeper sense of responsibility to do something, right? When I see cuts to Medicaid or SNAP benefits, they're not just bad policy decisions to someone like me, they're personal. I grew up in a family raised by a single mom who relied on social services, Section 8 housing, SNAP benefits, food stamps, Medicaid. I was a free lunch kid in a public school, and I got my health care at Planned Parenthood. All of that is on the line right now. And I feel a deep sense of responsibility to the version of my younger self that's still out there who really needs a champion in this moment. And so where I come from and where I'm going are deeply connected in my mind.
Well, you have a history now of advocacy and activism. Not everybody does that at the period in their young life that you did in your teens. Did you ever see yourself taking this path to Washington, D.C.?
Yeah. When I was a kid, I wanted to be president when I grew up. And I was the kind of kid who ran for student council and won, but it wasn't until I was 15 years old and I was forced to move out of my mom's home because of her struggles with substance abuse, right? And while she navigated the rehabilitation process, I was navigating being on my own, having to figure out everything from getting myself to school to getting my homework done, working a gas station job to make ends meet, but also really tough questions around my access to reproductive care. Mm-hmm. I was a part of a school district that had last updated their curriculum in the 80s for sex education. I was taught a curriculum that didn't mention consent, that was medically inaccurate, and was brought to you by the baseball coach. And, that was when I first really started getting active in politics. And I started showing up and sharing my story, demanding that my school board members do better. But that was to no power on the other side of the dais, right? It was about issue area advocacy, pushing elected officials to be better. But it made it clear to me that who was in office had everything to do with what was the priority, right? Who cared about the issues that I was sharing, right? Who was moved by a story like mine? Who was accountable to their constituents, these students? Were questions that were answered in election cycles. And so when the 2020 election rolled around, I had already been fighting for the last 5 years at that point for reproductive rights, better sex education, going toe-to-toe with my Republican senator over his attempts to defund Planned Parenthood centers, a video that went viral of that exchange. Mm-hmm. And it became clear to me in the 2020 election that it was going to be hard, if not impossible, to get ahead on the issues I cared most about that impacted me and my family, the man like Donald Trump in office. And that's what brought me to the electoral side of politics, right? To be working for a candidate like Kamala Harris, where I did digital strategy behind the scenes in 2019, when I was just 19 years old and one of the youngest presidential staffers in history. But I was brought to that electoral work once again from a sense that we could not get ahead on the issues without better people in office. And I feel that way now, not just because of someone like Donald Trump, but because Democrats are so far out of touch, right? They have an approval rating in the 20% in this moment. And that has everything to do with broken trust between them and core constituencies in our party that I represent. Young people, people of color, working class folks. And I could not in good faith continue to work behind the scenes on campaigns or in front of the camera. As you mentioned, I was a surrogate, spoke at the DNC, unless I could really give people someone they could get excited about. That's what brought me to this run.
There's a great quote on your campaign homepage.
Yeah.
It says, "I didn't pick politics. Politics picked me."
Yeah.
And I've been listening to what you've been saying, so I'm sure part of your answer is in stuff you've already said. But is there more to that quote and what's behind it?
Yeah. I mean, you've already heard the personal story that brings me to politics. But what you probably also know is that so many other politicians, so many other elected officials are brought to this because it is a career for them. Because they run for office and then run for office again, and they check the boxes, but they are not champions. And it's so incredibly frustrating to see people who hold the job title of representative lose the plot, fail to represent their constituents. And I'm not just talking about Republicans who are attempting to push through a budget bill in the middle of the night while their constituents sleep, right? A bill that would strip healthcare from millions, that would reduce SNAP benefits. I mean, literally take food off of the table of our most vulnerable families. But Democrats as well, who are failing to see and respond to the demands of their constituents. You know, I think about even in 2024, lessons that we were hearing loud and clear, things like age matters, or Democratic primaries are important, right? And I see now in my own race, a reluctance from our party to embrace that. And so the quote, "I didn't pick politics, politics picked me," not only highlights that my life has been political from its onset because I relied on the services that elected officials, by and large, had sway over, but because so many of those elected officials fail to represent people like me and my family, and have instead picked politics as a career, not as a calling.
So the seat you're running for, it's an open seat. It's open
That's right.
due to the death of Representative Raul
Yeah.
Grijalva. Back in March, he passed away. The primary is July 15th. The special election is the 23rd of September.
Yes.
Especially given what a lot of folks say about the truncated campaign of your former boss, Kamala Harris. Do you feel confident that that's enough time for you to mount an effective campaign?
I think it's actually almost the exact amount of days of the Kamala Harris campaign, which is an eerie similarity. I think it was 107 days run for Kamala Harris for president. And I think when you actually look at the total of mine, it was something like 106 in this primary. And I'm of the opinion that primaries should be shorter. It would save voters a whole lot of energy. It would save campaigns a whole lot of time. I promise you, nobody is asking for longer primaries or election cycles. You know what I mean? And while it's an uphill battle for sure, and I'll just point out a few reasons why. I'm young. I'm working class. I'm a first-time candidate. I'm a person of color, a first-generation American. All of that was going to be difficult to start with, right? I am running in a system not designed for people like me to succeed. Even the structures and strategies that are built around campaigns are not built for a candidate like me. And I'll give you two examples. The first is that when you launch a campaign, the first piece of advice you'll get is to do call time to your friends and your family, to ask them for the funds to get started. You go through your contact list and you assign sort of dollar amounts next to everyone you know, and you ask them to pitch in, which is a strategy that works a whole hell of a lot better. If you're not the friend and family member, people generally call for money,
right.
Which is an experience that so many people from immigrant backgrounds like me, right, who come from working class families can understand. To be the breadwinner of your family is an incredibly different situation than most people who use their families as an asset. And you know, the other piece of that is that I'm running against someone who has a legacy last name. And we watched, as just a few weeks ago, early in our race, this other candidate inherited the email and fundraising list of the former congressman, right, from his team. A major advantage in this race, and the kind of advantage that people like us would simply never have. And it's not to say that it's unfair. It is just to say that that's business as usual. And for a candidate like me, it was never going to happen. You know, my mom worked every odd job. You can imagine being the kind of parent who's delivering flowers or working at the post office or caring for the elderly. You just don't have those same advantages to share.
Yeah. You know, it is a reality of politics, the stuff you're saying.
Right.
But then you look at someone like an AOC who came out of nowhere, also young. She was a waitress. She took on somebody who had been doing it for, 20 years. And there was a stunning upset. So timing, where the country is at, the mood of
has everything
the
to
electorate,
do with it.
and the message and the messenger. So there's a reason why you're running. It's not just like you woke up one day and someone pushed you, and you have a certain skill set. You are.
Oh, absolutely not. I woke up and most people told me not to do this.
So you're.
I'm in it out of a deep sense of responsibility.
Yeah,
for sure.
and that matters. So what are the issues that you're most concerned about that you're running on?
Yeah, the signature issue for me over the last decade has been reproductive rights. The issue I've stood 10 toes down on, that I've been arrested for on Capitol Hill right after the overturn of Roe versus Wade, and an act of civil disobedience alongside movement leaders and also a handful of Congress people, which we should have seen more out there, right? And so it is one thing to point out that I am Gen Z, that I'd be the first woman of my generation in Congress. It is another to go the step further and remind people that I am the first generation of women to have less rights than our mothers. This is an entirely different political understanding and sense of urgency that women of my generation bring to this work. And, the next piece is that I have always seen reproductive rights as tied to economic opportunity. And I think that's the frame that resonates the most with people here in my district and across the country, right? This story that it is because I had access to birth control, because I fought my senator who attempted to defund Planned Parenthood centers, where I got care when I had no money, no parents, and no insurance, that I was able to go on to be the first in my family to go to college. When you make that connection between these broad stroke issues back to what is personal, what is aspirational for families here in Tucson and in more rural areas of our district, they really understand the issues. But it takes good storytelling. It takes that lived experience to make those connections clear. And so the next issue really is having to do with creating an economy where people don't just get by, but they have a shot at getting ahead. And that's twofold. The first piece of this is we need to make sure that we're protecting our social services, right? That means standing up to Trump and Republicans who are attempting to line the pockets of billionaires with those basic services, the funding for basic services like Medicaid, for SNAP, that single moms like mine rely on just to put a roof over our head and food on the table, right? And so it is required that we stand up to Trump and these Republicans to protect these social services because our families can't wait. It is a matter of saving our economy to make sure that these young people's potential is invested in, right, and protected, and that families don't slip even further below the poverty line and are unable to get up from it. But we also need to look ahead for young people like me. Creating a future that's livable isn't just theoretical, right? And so we're also thinking critically about how do we relieve student loan debt? How do we make sure that the climate crisis is acknowledged and addressed in a way that creates new future-proofed jobs for those young people and a real opportunity economy going ahead?
So the House right now is controlled by Republicans. That's the reality. And it's really become, for the most part, a pretty legislatively bankrupt cesspool, a toxic partisan cesspool because of its pathetic fealty to Trump and not the Constitution. So how do you plan to navigate through that chaos and corruption?
Yeah. You said that, not me.
I've said it many times, actually.
Right, exactly. But I mean, this is what we are all observing. And to tell people otherwise is to deny what is happening in front of their eyes. I recognize that getting ahead under a Trump trifecta is going to be very difficult, but I organized through the first Trump administration, and that was hard too. It is hard work, but it is good work to defend our families. And I think what sets me apart in this race is what answers your question, which is that safer and bluer seats. Actually, rather, I'll say it this way, and this might be a little bit of a civics lesson for some folks out there, which is that it's something like, I want to say 90%, but definitely the majority of House seats are safe. They are either Republican seats or Democratic seats, right? They are blue or they are red. There are very few districts in this country that actually flip between the two. And so when we see districts like mine, which are safer and bluer, which are hard to come by in places like Arizona, which have been held for 22 years, basically my lifetime, we need to look at how to best use those seats, right? They might not be swinging from Republican to Democrat, which is a very apparent use that we need to gain a majority and a margin in the House. But instead, when we look at these safer and bluer seats, we need to be asking ourselves, who are we as a party? What is the message we are sending this country? What are we saying about ourselves, and how are we building our bench of leadership? And the Democratic Party is not only failing to legislate because of a really broken system and because we are in the minority as it stands, but failing to message. One of the biggest complaints we hear on the doors in Arizona as we chat with voters is that they do not feel fought for. And that is an unforced error. It has everything to do with the fact that Democrats are putting their heads down, that they lack courage, and they believe that when Donald Trump is out of office, the Republican Party of my parents' generation will come back. And that is not true. Instead, we need to be thinking about how we invest in our next generation of leaders in our party. And that is the question of how do we build our bench of leaders? How do we elect effective messengers? And here on this campaign, we have seen that our story is resonating. There's a hunger for candidates like me. We have nearly 6 million views on our campaign content on TikTok and Instagram alone, without a dollar of paid behind it, just really good storytelling and meeting the moment. And I think about how in a special election primary in the middle of Arizona's summer, that is not supposed to happen, right? There are congressional candidates who can't even touch those views, who can't even command that kind of attention for important efforts, for things that matter in the House. And so we need to get serious about our messaging as Democrats and electing effective messengers in safer and bluer seats.
And where do you stand on the party's leadership? Do you support Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries and Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer?
I mean, I think some of that question comes down to, do they support young leaders? And I will leave that for others to answer, right, through their actions. They have an opportunity to show up and do that. But instead, what I often see as I've gotten into this race is that every member of this party, of the establishment, goes and shares a stump speech in which they say without fail, and I have heard it as a content creator on the Capitol, as somebody who pays attention to politics, we need newer and younger leaders. The amount of times I've heard, we need a next generation of leaders. And yet, when someone like me with a decade of experience stands up to lead, I have seen people in our very own party for an open seat primary put their thumb on the scale to choose a predictable candidate over one that represents the possibility of our party. And it is the ways that Democrats have continued within our establishment to value the word of electeds and establishment over the voters, over our constituents, that has broken trust. And I'm seeing it in my own race. And it's deeply frustrating to people on the ground who continue to show up to be a part of our democratic process and feel that their voice is not being heard or represented.
Mm-hmm. So that kind of sort of sounds like a no, maybe, in terms of the support?
I think it's an open opportunity. As young people continue to step up to run, Democratic leadership has an opportunity to do something differently. And I'll share this once again, that this 2025 special election here in Southern Arizona has big consequences for the people who live in my district, my constituents. But it is also the very first referendum on if we learned our lessons in 2024 and what we do here and now, which this is really speaking to folks all across the country who might be listening, what we do in this special election with a candidate like me, who's young and disruptive, who is that new generation of leadership. If we show up, it will send a loud message to the Democratic Party and set us up for a very different midterm election. The kind of candidates that will be recruited, funded, and endorsed will look different depending on the outcome of this race. So everybody across the country should have stake in it.
I'm glad you used the word disruptive, because I want to ask you about David Hogg, the NC vice chair. He recently announced, as you know, he's going to spend through his Leaders We Deserve organization about $20 million to primary what is called less effective Democrats in safe districts. Where are you on that, given what we're talking about?
Yeah. I'll be clear that I am running for an open seat. And there's some people are treating it like I'm running against an incumbent because there's a legacy last name in this race. I am not. I'm running for a seat that has not been open for 22 years. And that is brought to us because my member of Congress passed away. And so I'll say this, that folks like David and I can agree that this is a conversation we need to have. We need to talk about age in our party. We have seen 3 members pass away in the past, I don't even know what the timeline is, but
just a few months, right?
Yeah, the last few months. And the last 8 of the last 10 members to pass away have all been Democrats. And so there is a conversation about age in our party and in our governmental systems generally that needs to be had. And it has consequences. When these members pass away in office, people in my district right now, hundreds of thousands of whom will be impacted by cuts to Medicaid and SNAP benefits, do not have a representative in the House. And that budget bill passed by 1 vote. We have 3 Democratic seats, 3 blue seats sitting vacant. It is not impossible to say that if those vacancies did not exist, we may not be in this position. And so our party needs to be willing to have a conversation about age and do more than just say they want newer and younger leaders, but support us when we stand up to lead. But that includes, organizations, institutions, and party leadership.
Look, I'm a big supporter of David. He's been on this podcast a few times.
Sure.
I think he's shaking shit up, and that's pissing people off,
Yeah.
I've watched a lot of interviews he's done in the last few weeks, and whether it's CNN or MSNBC or newspapers or wherever, the only thing that seems to come at him is that you're upsetting the establishment, which is, to me, exactly why he's doing what he's doing. Because if you look at the last election, we didn't do very well on the Democratic side. So I give him a lot of support, and I wish there were a lot more people like him. And that kind of leads into my next question, which, I'll be brutally honest. There's a lot of young people who just seem to have checked out of politics for one reason or another. And judging by turnout statistics, they just don't seem to care. Even though women have lost their reproductive rights, housing and healthcare is unaffordable, and our democracy is at stake, and civil rights are under assault. How do you plan to excite and re-engage young voters in your campaign?
We already are. It's one thing to tap a strategist like me every election cycle, and in the few weeks leading up to an election, ask, how do we engage young people? And it is another to run young candidates that by our very nature engage young people. And I hate to say that the solution is simple, but it is, that we need to run younger candidates. That is how we get young people excited. And I will say that it is not the fault of young people that they are not engaged, right? That's like saying that it's the fault of the customer that they don't want to buy your product. It is our party that is failing to attract them, failing to include them.
Well, it's a two-way street. I mean, you're running. You've always been active. David has put his ass on the line.
Yeah.
And so we see some young people really taking an aggressive leap forward to try to change the system from within. Sure. We don't see, 30% of people under 30 show up and vote on election day. I mean, that's...
Yeah, but that has
you can change things if you vote, right?
It's a chicken and an egg situation. And I know this intimately because I'm running a campaign right now, which is that so many campaigns have limited resources. And they have to ask themselves, with limited time and limited money, where will we put it? And they always are going to invest first in the highest efficacy voters, which tend to be older voters, the ones who turn out time and time again, which leads to younger voters being under-contacted, not engaged with, which means that they don't come out that cycle. And you know what that does the next cycle? Mm-hmm. Is that those young people were not engaged, so they're low efficacy, so people do not invest in them. So the next cycle, they don't show up again. And so it is an issue of prioritization. It is an issue of investment. And that is true not only on the side of our party failing to invest in reaching young people in a real and substantive way, but also, failing to invest in young talent in this party. And so I think it's short-sighted to say that young people don't care. Young people do care, but they do not see the road to a better life running through DC at this moment, right? And frankly, that's the kind of thing we're going to have to prove to them. Why should they think that, right? They've had it hard as a generation. You can imagine Donald Trump has been running for president since I was 15 years old. He has completely and irrevocably changed our political system and thrown rules out the window. He is a 34-count convicted felon living in the White House. I mean, are we really giving young people the kind of system that they can look at and say, that's justice, right? This bends toward the arc of justice. I'm not sure that we are.
Well, I agree with you on virtually everything you said, which is why I said it is a two-way street. And I think it circles back to one of the things you said at the very start of this conversation about civics lessons. I'm not sure we're cheating our students, our young people today, by not teaching them the things I was taught, which is, doesn't matter what's coming at you. If you vote, that is the one day out of the year where the janitor and the billionaire have the exact same power. And if you vote, not in 30, 40, 50% turnout rates, but 60, 70, 80%, you can have everything you want. I don't know how clear that message is. And maybe to your point, that's where young people are just disillusioned because they see a system that's broken and maybe they just don't understand how they can fix it. Because the solution isn't that, it's not rocket science. It's just one day, get up, go to the polls and vote. And that's not just young people, but that's any generation. The older folks don't vote in great numbers either. It's something I don't really understand, Deja. It is the one day where you can control everything, and people just don't seem to get that.
I mean, I'm with you. I want to share two sides of this, which is that it's nice to think that in our current political system, there's one day of the year where the janitor and the billionaire have the same say, right? That's how our elections work. And maybe on an electoral level, on a straight votes level, that is how it works. However, with decisions like Citizens United, right, which have characterized the entirety of young people like me's political understanding, that's simply not the case, right? Big money has had outsized influence on our elections as long as people my age can remember. And so they're not actually wrong to feel that they have less influence on elections than bigger interests, right? What they feel is right. But you are also correct to say that they have been cheated out of their collective power, of believing in their collective power. And it's an uphill battle we face every day in this very election, right? One of the benefits of this election being shorter is that it is actually less expensive than primaries that drag on for an entire year or so. And so when we go and we start fundraising, right, we're not just fundraising from big dollar donors, and we're not fundraising from corporate interests who don't align with, the best interests of our voters. We are truly raising from everybody pitching in just a little bit. And we have the advantage of scale, that our videos are organically reaching millions of people without a dollar paid behind them, right? And that we are going out online, reaching people at scale, and collecting grassroots donations that are powering this campaign to the tunes of thousands of people. And so what I want to say is that I get on Instagram and TikTok and I make these videos and I share with people that if everybody who watched our videos pitched in $1, like literally a single dollar, we would not just be done fundraising, we would be 10 times past our goal, essentially, right? And so the only thing standing between electing a candidate like me, a newer and younger candidate, someone who is inspirational and disruptive, and who is beholden to them, not to big money, is literally them believing that their $1 matters. And it's not dissimilar to the question we're asking on a votes level in this special election. This is a special election primary, July 15th, here in Southern Arizona. And it's buried in the middle of summer. It is likely to be a very low turnout election that could be decided by just a few hundred votes, which could be your graduating class in high school, right? I mean, that is the kind of numbers that could decide this election. It could be even smaller margins. And so, once again, it's helping people, I believe, to understand that their collective power does make a difference, that when they take action, it can create change, but it's an uphill battle, because truly our systems are not built that way. They've been eroded and corrupted over time, such that there are big influences on these elections that outsize, everyday participation.
Absolutely. And I think you're 100% right about the institutional forces that tip the scales. I'll be sending you some money today, more than $1. I will use my social media to help generate funds. But I do think it is important, like if we look at Wisconsin, for example, the Supreme Court, we had a billionaire, Elon Musk. He put so much money into that race. And what happened? It didn't matter. Because the people showed up and they voted. Yeah. And that's why it's not an all or nothing thing. It's just everybody's got to do their part. If people want to support you, where do they go? How do they do it?
Yeah. I mean, everybody is going to have to do their part if we're going to get across the finish line. What we are doing is hard work, but it's good work. And it's possible if we do it together. And so I want to invite folks. You've already heard a little bit about me and my story, but I want you to check out our policies. I want you to engage with us at dejafoxx.com. You can find ways to support our campaign, volunteer on the ground or virtually, or pitch in, $5, $10, whatever you can, to help us get across the finish line and do things differently.
Come back in early July and we'll get you some more coverage. Good luck between now and then, and I'm rooting for you.
I always appreciate your thoughtful questions.
Take care.
Bye.
This episode of The Back Room was edited and produced by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-edited and co-produced by Maddie Rosenberg, and co-produced by Jen Hammoud. Our theme song was composed by Andrew Hollander, and our logo was designed by Cricket Langell. And special thanks to Patricia Wind. Please take a moment to rate and review the podcast, and also follow or subscribe. Until next time, keep your eyes on Washington, Hollywood, and your own backyards, and have a great week.